Hello.
Hi, good morning, Jacob.
Good morning.
Good morning. Waiting for Lois's phone to connect. How have you been, Jacob?
I've been okay. Busy.
Good. Hey, Lois.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi, how are you? Hey, David.
Well.
So I finally did find an article that deals with the subject of Ava. And so, oh wait, I'm gonna cancel that and share screen. So I thought we'd read the article together. Again, this is, somebody's halachic analysis. His name's Rabbi Yair Hoffman. I've read many of his. They are well researched, but it is, one person's treatment of it. But we're just, as always, looking for a thoughtful look at a subject, not necessarily the last word, but a thoughtful look at it. Okay, Rabbi Yair Hoffman. It was the stuff of headlines. The Zaka Voluntary Emergency Service Organization announced last Thursday that it would not abide by a directive from the Israel Medical Association, which instructed all doctors and medics to triage all casualties at a terror scene according to the severity of their wounds. The directive explicitly said, including the terrorists who carried out the attack. This means that if a terrorist stabs 5 Jews, Rahman al-Islam, and gets shot, if his condition is worse than the victims, he should be treated first. Zaka is, as he says, a voluntary emergency service organization. They are usually called afterwards and are sort of cleaning up the mess. They're the ones who make sure the bodies are treated with dignity. They're the ones, if there was an explosion, they're the ones who gather the various parts of the body, etc. All for the purpose of making sure they have a dignified burial. They're not necessarily first responders, although obviously it depends on the circumstances. They might end up being first responders, but they usually they're at least from the description, from what I've read, they're usually there afterwards. But apparently they are sometimes first responders and would be called to give immediate care. So they received a directive from the Israel Medical Association, and that was the directive. The Israel Medical Association's new rules replaced an earlier 2008 directive that was based on the principle of charity begins at home, which enabled medical professionals to treat victims first. The decision to change the guidelines came after an appeal to the Ethical Bureau of the Israel Medical Association. The appeal came from the Physicians for Human Rights group, who argued that the previous rules contradicted accepted medical ethics and international humanitarian laws. While Israeli doctors and medical staff see it as an ethical duty to attend to the injuries of terrorists and treat them the same as they would be victims, until the recent change, they were able to prioritize victims rather than perpetrators. But now, with the new directives, if the terrorist is more severely injured, he must be treated before his victims. At first glance, it seems like the type of inane directive that would make one's blood boil. It is thus quite understandable how Zaka's chairman and founder, Yehuda Meshi Zahav, made it clear that Zaka's medics would turn their attention to victims first, regardless of the injuries sustained by their attacker. We direct Zaka volunteers to first treat the Jewish victims of terror attack without blinking an eye, he said. Only after they've been given medical assistance should they begin treating the murderous terrorists who carried out the attack. In spite of the ethical code that says that one should treat the most severely injured first, one should know that even morality has its boundaries, Meshi Zahav added. If we do not make this distinction, we lose our direction. Even in Jewish law, it says, he who is merciful to the cruel will end up being cruel to the merciful. The Ethics Bureau is the only legal body in Israel that decides ethical standards for Israeli medical staff. Its rulings apply to doctors, paramedics, emergency services, and nurses. But is Meshi Zahav right from a halachic perspective, or is the Israel Medical Association correct? As in all matters of halacha, the underlying issues need to be properly explored, and we must leave emotion behind. The underlying issue is the idea of Ava and its parameters. Ava literally means hate. Halacha tells us that when certain actions on our part would engender an excessive hate-filled reaction on the part of others, we can and must temper or change those actions on our part. In Shulchan Aruch, Yoreh De'ah 158.1, we find that the idea of Ava allows us to provide medical care that would save the life of someone that halacha would normally not sanction to provide care for. Tosfos in Gittin 70a, Rav Shimi Bar Ashi, explains that Rav Shimi possibly cured such a person on account of Ava. Imagine that a Nazi leader was shot, for example, in Hitler's famous beer hall putsch. Would it have been permitted for Jews to provide the Nazi leader with medical care? Normally, halacha would not sanction it. Now, this, I'm assuming that when he says halacha would not sanction it, he's talking about a prohibition called lo sechanem. There is this is mentioned when the Jewish people are specifically in battle with the 7 nations. And it at one point at the end of a verse, it says lo techanem. Literally, lo techanem means do not show them grace. Do not show the enemy grace. There's actually 4 different laws that are learned from that phrase, lo techanem. One of them is if the enemy is in peril, you are not to show them mercy. That is one of the laws. In fact, that's considered the pshat. That's considered the pshat. That's considered the first meaning of the verse. There are also other laws that are learned from it, which are relatively more benign, but one of them is that you're not allowed to sell land to Gentiles in the land of Israel. I mean, I use the word Gentiles. It needs to be sort of qualified there, because if they are what's called ger toshav, which means they are a Gentile, but they're living in Israel according to the Noahide laws, there you are. There is some question if you're allowed to sell them land, and it does not seem that the rest of these rules apply. These rules would only apply to somebody who is what we would call an idolater or an enemy, but you're also not to show them, you're not supposed to praise them, you're not allowed to show them, you're not allowed to sell land, you're not allowed to show them mercy in these kind of cases, and I lost the other one, but there is another one. Anyways, I'm assuming that's the halacha. That's why when he's talking about the Nazi case, that you should not, you're not supposed to show him mercy. You're not even supposed to give him medical care at all. Normally, halacha would not sanction it, but it may lead to Ava. So if you have a scenario where it would lead to Ava, it would be permitted. As a historical note, 2 Jewish women did provide such medical assistance to Hermann Goering when he was shot at the putsch. Their actions did not help to stop the Holocaust, however. And again, that's part of this thing with Ava, that how to measure. On the one hand, you're not supposed to do something that would cause more hatred. That doesn't necessarily mean you're helping the Jewish cause in the long run, but it does seem like if it is assumed to be Ava, that it would lead to more hatred that could, again, lead to violence against Jewish people, that you would be required to treat even somebody like Hermann Goering. In Shulchan Aruch, go ahead.
No, I just, usually, I know if you're like a doctor or some sort of healer of any sort, you go by different rules because a lot of times you took a vow and you have to uphold that even on Shabbos. But I think in some scenarios, you might want to help this person die instead of help them, especially if no one will know about it.
Right. So no one would know about it would not be a problem of Ava. If no one will know about it, then it's not a problem of Ava, because the permit of Ava is only because people will know about it. And then they'll get hatred. But so if nobody would know about it, then you wouldn't provide care in that situation.
But if it's ordinary, but if it's like an enemy, even if it's Ava, like, I don't know, it's kind of a hard.
I know it's very hard. That's why Meshi Zahav is saying we're not going to listen to this, but he wants to explore the Ava part. Plus, I don't think you're right about the vow part.
You made a vow?
Let's say you made the Hippocratic Oath or whatever you would call it. That is not. That wouldn't permit it. It wouldn't permit this. You would be making a vow against something written in the Torah. Your vow would be null and void. You can't make a vow against something written in the Torah, because the halachic expression is you already made a vow at Sinai, and so this vow can't overcome another vow. So if the halacha was that you're supposed to let this person die, even if you made some vow that you're not going, that requires you to, you have a precedent, a preceding vow that is considered more authoritative because it was the first vow you made as part of the Jewish people at Sinai. And so, again, we're all speaking in theory here. I'm not a posek of note, but that's typically how we treat that. So, for instance, let's say you made a vow as an accountant that I don't know, or as an attorney, you made some vow, but now you find yourself in a position where because of the vow, you'd have to violate halacha. You're not allowed to. You are already considered to have made a vow at Sinai. It becomes more complex if it's rabbinic. Let's say, but even there, at least according to Maimonides, you have already made a vow to listen to the decrees of the rabbis. So you would still be duty bound based on that first vow. And so any vow you made afterwards, if it would contradict the Torah, you wouldn't be allowed to uphold, or it would be a violation to uphold it.
Rabbi, have you ever met another rabbi or might have been some guy in another religion, but they're like a miracle worker. Like they pray and this guy suddenly walks. I don't think there are that many these days, but
let's say.
Well, let's say I think someone like that who clearly has like a direct connection to Hashem. I think someone like that, they got to make their own.
He is still bound. Even a miracle worker is bound by halacha, and he's bound by his responsibility to to that first vow. So there is no novi rishoy lechadesh davar. A prophet is not allowed to make new law. Again, we've seen that there are exceptions to that, but typically that is meant that even no matter what your abilities, no matter what your connection to God, you're still bound by the Torah, and you would still be considered bound by halacha.
Rabbi,
There are, yeah,
um, would you be saying then that if a Jew saw a Gentile drowning and there was no one else around and it was Shabbos, he should let him drown?
No, I don't think you
there
have to
was,
break Shabbos to save someone who's drowning, though, necessarily.
well, if you had to break Shabbos, well, the thing is, when you say the word Gentile, and we are being recorded here, so I'm just gonna clarify that when you say the word
A
Gentile,
non-Jew, I don't.
right? When you say the word Gentile, there are different classifications, and as a matter of practical halacha nowadays, we were talking about this in some of our previous classes. As a matter of practical halacha, it seems like most of the Gentiles that we would come in contact with would not have this prohibition of lo techanem. In other words, that the prohibition against saving them would regularly. I talk about on a regular day. Let's say it's not Shabbos. Let's say on if you saw the average Gentile drowning, I'm saying this in theory, just based on other discussions of this prohibition, it would seem like you are duty bound to save them.
Right.
But on Shabbos, for violating Shabbos, as Jacob was pointing out, for violating Shabbos, you would not. And so if it would require violating Shabbos, and even that we'd have to, you'd go case by case, because there might be a way of doing it where you're not violating Shabbos and etc. But if there was no other way to do it but by violating Shabbos, you would be right. If there's no way that anybody could know, then it would not be Ava, and then the regular halacha would apply. Yeah. So again, who is in a position to know that it won't get out? Moshe Rabbeinu thought nobody would know when he killed the Egyptian, but it got out. So who could really know? So this would be almost only a theoretical case, because in practice, I don't know how anybody would know for sure that nobody would know. But let's say you're in a situation, you're on a desert island, there's no other person, and nobody's going to find out. Somehow, in some theoretical case, that would be true, that you would not be able to save them. Okay, but just to be clear, when it comes to the prohibition we're talking about, which is not the Shabbos one, it's lo techanem, that prohibition, as far as my understanding is, would not apply to almost any of the Gentiles that we would come across. That the prohibition against showing mercy or giving medical care or saving a Gentile would only apply to somebody who is either a full-blown idolater or somebody in a situation like this where they're like an enemy of the people. Okay, so
I think you kind of have to, like, let's say you were in a war, you sort of have to apply your gut. If like this guy's head of whatever, Hamas or whatever, it's like, I mean, well, maybe you'd want him like as a prisoner, but besides that, you'd want him to die. But if it's just like some random guy,
I agree. But
maybe
here they're
you
talking
save him.
about directives to soldiers. I agree.
Yeah.
In the moment, there's all sorts of things that are flying through your head. I was thinking about, I heard somebody talking about NFL quarterbacks, how many in a split second, how many decisions they're actually making. Like they're seeing the situation, they have to see the configuration of the defense, what they're most likely, what scheme they're most likely going to be, putting into play. And then you have to see who's open, and there's all sorts of decisions you have to make in a split second. And certainly you could imagine how soldiers are being asked to do that, and it's all happening in a split second. And certainly, as it is mentioned in Halacha in several places, the Torah was not given to angels. Human beings are not perfect, and therefore it's possible we're going to make a wrong decision in the moment. But we're talking about directives, theoretical. We're looking at the sort of big picture, but we are also looking at all the factors that would be involved, and then they are going to figure into what a soldier, is prepared. This soldier is prepared for in battle. Makes a big difference if this is somebody who's a seasoned fighter or somebody who's doing it for the first time. And again, we're all human beings, and it's possible that we're going to make a mistake. But even in the aftermath, let's say you're looking over the film like they would in football, the mistakes will be pointed out so that you can learn to do it better in the future. So the question is, what is the, if it had been done perfectly, what would be the perfect thing to do in this situation? He's going to go, the reason we're looking at this is because of Ava, and he's going to do a thorough treatment of Ava. So we're not, our main focus is not on how to deal with terrorists, but this is why the subject came up. And so he's doing a thorough treatment of Ava. In Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah, Moshe Isulish, 1500, the Ramah rules that if a fire breaks out in a Gentile location and the Jew is present, it is permitted to violate Shabbos and put out the fires so that they not accuse us, and the matter would lead to Ava. Now, while it could be that this is considered a malacha she'eina tzricha l'gufa, in other words, this, like I was saying before, sometimes you see something and it looks like it would violate Shabbos, but there are other factors that mitigate the Shabbos violation. Like here, putting out this fire may not be a biblical offense because you're not putting it out for the sake. Regularly putting out a fire is only considered a biblical offense if you're doing it for a productive purpose. Here, you're not putting out the fire for a productive purpose. You're just putting out the fire to put out the fire. So here, it may not even be, he's suggesting it might be mitigated. It still appears to be a full-fledged biblical prohibition. Again, if we were studying Shabbos and we were studying fires, we would look into this more deeply. Terrorists are murderers of innocent people, and once cured of whatever ails them, will probably go out and murder again. Yet if terrorists are not treated, then other innocents will suffer. Other countries and enemies will refrain from providing treatment to innocent people. Therefore, we are treating them so that mankind in general will benefit. And when two doctors had the question of treating terrorists posed to Rabbi Yoshev, he ruled that they should be treated on account of Ava. So even though they're terrorists, Rabbi Yoshev ruled that you must treat them because of Ava, which means the broader hatred that could come out. In this case, the hatred is expressed in the fact that they will not treat innocent people in other countries, and that would include Jews. And so he ruled that you must treat the terrorists, medically treat them. Regarding the mitzvah of Eishes Yifas Toar, so this is talking about the, you could call it the sanctioning of a rape of a woman captured in battle. So Meshech Chochma on Devarim 21:10 asks, why is it necessary for the Torah to write the following bolded words in the whole verse? When you go out to war against your enemies, and Hashem delivers them into your hands, and you take captives. If you notice among the captives a beautiful woman or attracted to her, you may take her as your wife. If we have made sense, if it would have made sense to just write when you go to war against your enemies and you take captives. The Meshech Chochmah, now this is Mayor of Dvinsk. He is, the Meshech Chochmah is, I'll remember his name in a minute. So he's writing in the, I think, late 1800s. The Meshech Chochmah answers that only when you have completely vanquished the enemy would it be permitted to take a captive woman as a wife. Otherwise, the enemy may also capture your women and may forcibly marry them against their will. This is rape. If they hear that you had married one of their captive women. So that's all rape. He's talking about rape. Clearly, not every Ava is created equally. Ramosha Feinstein, Eurodea 184, cites a number of sources where some Avas would permit Shabbos violation while others would not. The Chelkas Yaakov, Eurodea 168, also differentiates between different times and places in regard to Ava. How bad is this particular Ava? Will it adversely affect the way innocent people are treated in other countries and other places? Now, again, we're talking in theory. We're talking about people that have time to make this kind of judgment. Oftentimes you're in a moment and you're going to have to make this decision on your own. And I'm assuming that people would be counseled to be careful, in other words, to assume Ava unless you're absolutely certain it's not. Again, that's my 2 cents on in the theory. The terrorists who stab and kill still have landsmen, in other words, others, who empathize with them in Turkey, Iran, and in other areas too. It is really beyond the pale of our imagination that the Iranians and the Turks would not retaliate against Jews if we started to delay treatment of injured terrorists. Do they so understand the evils of terrorism that they would refuse retaliation? 5 other mitzvahs. So he's assuming that not taking care of terrorists would lead to Ava. It seems to him obvious that it would. Again, this underlines this issue, which was part of our issue from the beginning, which is in who gets to decide what is Ava and what is not. If you get a chance to talk to somebody like Rabbi Yoshev, blessed memory, then fine. But this is rarely the case, that you're going to be in a situation where there's potential Ava and you get a chance to consult somebody. So this is the vagary of it. Is one of the issues that just kind of the elephant in the room. 5 other mitzvahs, both positive and negative, are involved in treating the victims. Do we push off the fulfillment of these 5 other mitzvahs on account of Ava, or should we fulfill these mitzvahs? So how far does it go? In other words, is there a number of mitzvahs? Let's say you have on the one side a certain amount of mitzvahs, and on the other side you have Ava. How far does Ava go? Does it not matter how many mitzvahs are going to be set aside because of Ava? Is there something like that?
Rabbi, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I tuned in a little bit late by accident. I forgot what the word Ava means.
Hatred. This means that what you're doing is going to lead to hatred, and we're defining hatred here as something that would lead to harm to others, and especially Jews, that it would lead to harm of Jews. So in this case, particularly, he's talking about treating terrorists. The particular directive that was given to first responders in Israel was that if you're at a terrorist attack and there are victims and the terrorist is more seriously wounded than the victims, it is international humanitarian guidelines that you take care of the most seriously wounded, even if he's the terrorist. You have to take care of the most seriously wounded first, and then you take care of the ones who are lesser wounded. That had not been, up until the most recent guidelines, that had not been the case. Up until recently, the guidelines were that you take care of the victims first, and then you take care of the terrorist. But so it mentioned that the head of Zaka, who apparently are sometimes first responders, this is a voluntary organization that usually they deal with the bodies of people after of a terrorist attack, but apparently they are sometimes first responders. So the head of that organization refused to follow the guidelines. This is an Orthodox organization that follow Torah law, he's writing a theoretical article. He doesn't have input into Zaka's position. He's just trying to unpack this subject to see if, in this case, you should follow the broader guidelines that were set by Israel Medical Association based on the humanitarian guidelines that are, I guess, internationally accepted, or do you follow the head of Zaka, who says, no, we're treating the victims first and then the terrorist? So the issue here is Ava, and again, he's typically in situations like this, your concern is that if we don't follow through and take care of somebody, then it's going to lead to harm, a broader harm later on, in that victims, the other innocent people will be harmed because of a reaction to the fact that Israel doesn't take care of the terrorists, that others broadly will be harmed. So that's his sort of halachic foil. That's what he's presenting as a challenge to this Meshi Zahav, the head of Zaka, where he's arguing that it violates Torah law to take care of the terrorist first, but he is at least presenting a counter argument that actually the halacha might support the Israel Medical Association in this case, and that is because of the problem of Ava. So we are looking at the problem of Ava as a broad discussion of, for instance, why don't we rebuild the Beit HaMikdash nowadays, and why don't we destroy? Specifically, why don't we destroy houses of idolatry in Israel? Let's say there was a house of idolatry in Israel. There's a mitzvah to destroy them, to actually proactively find them and destroy them. But Israel, we don't do that in Israel. The typical explanation is because of Ava. So that's why we're exploring the subject and looking for some parameters. He happens to do that in this article, and that's why we're looking at it. It just happens to be about the terrorist issue.
Rabbi, we keep hearing, of course, that we're creating Ava in Gaza, and we shouldn't even, I mean, I know that's a different situation. It's not treating, our president says it's over the top what we're doing there, but I don't think we should take that seriously.
Right, so that's again part of this fuzziness of Ava.
I have something to say.
Yeah.
Because, look, let's be honest, like, Biden's clearly arming both sides of the conflict. Isn't he more our enemy than Hamas? I mean,
no.
Obviously he is. He's ruined our country, you know? If you look at
most
wars throughout history.
That's not that is a broader question. It's not, let's say it's beyond the scope of the Ava discussion. As to, I would say, as far as Israel concerned, right now, certainly Israel considers their number one enemy right now to be Hamas. They are saying the words Hamas. It's not just Hamas. It's anybody in league with,
Oh.
I don't think they consider.
I have a
Hamas
question
any
to
different
pose.
than
I have a
Hezbollah.
question to pose. Let's say, there was a war, and let's say it was a very nasty war. Let's say it's like the Romans with the Carthaginians, but the whole time, the leaders of each faction were meeting together to keep the war going. Who would be the enemy in that scenario?
Right. So that is up to the generals to decide. That's what we typically leave, even halachically, we leave it to the people that are considered the experts.
But I'm saying if the generals were meeting with the enemy generals to try and keep the war, they were in cahoots,
Right.
pitting
You
people
do
against
realize
each other.
that, but this kind of thinking would allow any individual to justify any act of violence against anybody. In other words, if this person used that kind of thinking, and it is often the thinking that you see that, I mean, we consider twisted thinking, but it's still thinking. It seems to be the thinking that justifies almost every case where somebody goes in and kills people. They have some kind of justification. If it was left to every individual to make those
I don't think you.
broad
I don't think you understood what I said. It's okay. I don't think you understand what I said. I'm saying like in World War II, the same companies that were funding the American military were also propping up the Nazis. Something
Right.
like
I know, but
that's what I'm saying.
I'm saying if you determined, if experts determined that this was the case, then the experts will have to decide how to proceed. But that is left to the experts to decide it, because if the average person reading about what's going on comes to these conclusions, they will end up, if they could act upon it, will end up acting. They will be doing the same thing that, let's say, Baruch Goldstein did when he massacred the people in Maris Machpelah, and so many other people who justified the killing of lots of people because he believed they were the enemy. He had come to a conclusion based on stuff that he knew, and he decided they were the enemy. The problem with Baruch Goldstein is that Baruch Goldstein wasn't in a position to make that decision. And halachically, if you're, again, we're speaking in theory, halachically, the people that get to make those decisions are the people that are considered the experts. In the case of war, it's generals. It may sometimes be politicians, but they are the people that are put in a position that are considered to have the expertise, and they also have permission to act on the conclusions that they make. But the average, I'm saying in theory, you might be right, and the experts might come to that conclusion, and therefore they may strike, just like Israel believes that Iran is supplying Hamas, and that Iran is the real enemy, and it's not Hamas or Hezbollah or this or that they call it the octopus, and that the octopus, the head of the octopus, is Iran. So, but they have to make a sort of reasoned decision about how to do it, and the people that end up having to do that are the people that happen to be the experts in place.
I'm telling you, I was just telling you this as a historian myself. That most wars,
and historians,
both sides are controlled by the same people, and it's usually just a way to get greater control.
It's possible
after all these people, the fighting age men are dead.
That is definitely possible. That's definitely
unfortunate, but
yeah, it's definitely possible.
Are you talking about the arms dealers, Jacob?
I'm talking about, I mean, the arms dealers, the leaders, Stalin, Churchill, Hitler, they were all, they were all.
You could say the Rothschilds.
Behind the scenes.
But if you're using this,
Rockefellers,
you could say the Rothschilds.
They too.
In
They're
World
not,
War One, the Rothschilds were funding both sides of World War One. You could say the Rothschilds are. And then once you say the Rothschilds are, you could say anybody who's supporting the Rothschilds and all the
but
Rothschilds.
it's not the
And then
Rothschilds.
you could
It's whatever
decide to
bank.
kill all the Jews
But there's a big
because
difference
you're
because
making
it's
that
like,
assumption.
but it's saying if one Catholic is in charge of this horrible corporation, that means all Catholics are guilty. There's a very big difference.
Well, it's not in the minds of a lot of people who
No, some
think
people
like
see
that.
this one guy on top who's maybe half Jewish or something. He's like, or like his
Right,
grandparents Jewish.
that's you. Thankfully, you don't think that. But I'm saying this line of reasoning, if it was if individuals were allowed to act based on their understanding of history, uh, it would justify all the things that all the violent acts carried out by every extremist organization, because they all have this view that they understand history and they understand the causes. And there are
I
many
think to the
people.
contrary.
I think if you polled people around the world for the past 2,000 years, you would find that almost all the experts, all the supposed experts, and almost all the historians, and almost all, if you polled them from 2,000 years ago till today, almost all of them would believe that somehow the Jewish people are responsible for everything terrible that has happened in the world. So it's just a cautionary thing about history.
No, I think, but that they don't have the reason to support that. I think you can put a powerful corporation like in that position, or the royal family, or the Vatican, or various institutions who have demonstrably done certain things. Versus, I think the issue, what I was saying is, people see all these horrible things going on, and instead of understanding this is a bad person from this group, this is a bad person from this group, they like to blame one group because
Right.
it's
That's what they
easier
tend
to understand.
Yes, I agree.
And it's not that they, deep inside, they understand what's going on, but it's just too
Right.
much for them to handle. And they have to
Right.
just say this one group's responsible, rather than my leaders have betrayed me and they're just as responsible as this guy's leader, or even more so.
But even
They
saying
can't handle that.
leaders,
Yeah,
is
leaders.
putting them all together in a group. So you just have to be, all I'm saying is that in the end, when it comes to this, and just bring us back to our thing, in the end, what we're looking for is some kind of guiding principle on how to act in these situations. And what he's suggesting to is that, there are a lot of factors involved. He wants to look at all the factors in order to determine what somebody should actually do in these scenarios. And it's going to require looking at all the various pieces and then putting them all together. And it's going to lead to, obviously there'll be training, and there requires experience, but it's hopefully going to lead to the data that eventually works its way into the decision of a particular soldier on the battlefield. But it's not. But there's going to be a kind of process, which he's again laying out here. Again, our main thing is to see a kind of discussion of Ava. That's what's coming up. But we're looking at all the different issues involved and trying to figure out now what he's trying to do is list a bunch of different mitzvahs and questioning, does Ava push aside a bunch of mitzvahs in a situation like this? And one of the things he's going to talk a little bit about some of our subjects as well. Okay, I look forward to doing more of this, looking more into this, and we'll continue reading this tomorrow. And thank you for
Thank you, Rabbi. Are
making
you
this
home?
interesting.
You're home now?
I'm home.
Rabbi?
My father is in St. Louis with my sister,
Oh,
and my sister has provided just a fantastic a place for my father and Judy. And so up until now, I was his main caregiver, but now my sister has taken over and she's doing a much better job. So I am freed up to go back to my regular teaching schedule. But I want you guys to know that last week you were the only class I was giving. I couldn't think well, and also I had time constraints. So you guys were the ones who kept me in Torah.
Well, thank you.
So I'm
Thank
very
you.
grateful for that.
Will you
Even
be
though
back
had
for
to
the
put
other
up with-
classes this week? I'm
Yeah, all
thinking
the
of
other
joining a
classes.
couple.
Yeah, all the other classes, the Tuesday night, the Wednesday.
Okay.
Yeah, they're all happening, but Bezrat Hashem Yitbarach.
So you picked that class, our class, because you didn't have to think so hard. I'm kidding. Okay.
I did. I that was part of it. Was part of it. Love.
Okay.
No, mostly it had to do with timing, but also because
But thank you.
learning with you guys is like it's the tree of life. The tree of life.
Mm.
Okay. Be well.
All right.
Thank you,
Be
Rabbi.
well.
And refuah
Thank you.
Shlema to your dad.
Thank you. Thank you, Estelle. Thank you. Be well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Be well.